So I got to Temple my freshman year. I started at Temple. I traveled from Minnesota. At that time, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do as far as post grad after high school. I was really getting into like community work around my local high school and in my local community, really learning about the different historical like organizations that have been around during like my grandparents and my parents' generation, and being a part of those at an early age. And so I decided to go to school for political science. I had a few different options as to where I wanted or I could have went in terms of just like where I wanted to focus. Um, and I was pretty undecided for a long time. I got a couple opportunities to play football and do music. But ultimately, I feel like I was called to go to Temple, not only because they were offering me a full ride, but because I think at that moment I was really passionate about being a part of like political work and understanding our political system.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we're just going to get into a little bit about what happened. Can you first explain to me your situation or your involvement in what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was recently involved in a demonstration that took place in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is the city I'm from. I've spent my entire life there, and I've got the chance to see a lot of the incredible work that organizers and journalists have done throughout the city to really capture and storytell the great things about St. Paul, Minneapolis, but also a lot of the terrible things that happen in St. Paul, Minneapolis. I think we have a very unique group of people in Minnesota, as the entire world has seen, that really is unapologetic about truth telling, and that's what you saw if you were at City's Church, in which I was at City's Church as well, supporting Don Lemon, who is a journalist who was formerly on CNN and is currently an independent journalist that tells the truth, is a truth teller. And my role there was to help him coordinate with his stay in Minneapolis specifically. He was there for a day, really wanting to capture the truth that was being told throughout the community. And so I recommended a couple of things that I had known was on the radar in terms of demonstrations and gatherings around the recent ICE Operation Surge, which was happening in the Twin Cities, in which they deployed over 1,000 ICE agents and really caused an uproar.
Hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Take a second to make sure I'm on the right track. Right. Okay. So how has being a St. Paul native been able to shape your views on some of the things that you have seen?
Being a St. Paul native has really changed the way that I see community. St. Paul is home of so many different people of different backgrounds. We are home to the largest population of Hmong immigrants, Karen immigrants, and there is such a huge amount of other groups of people, such as Somali, Ethiopian, Hispanic, African, etc. And growing up in St. Paul, I had such a diverse experience in school, a diverse experience in my community. I think even some of the school district in St. Paul speaks over 110 languages with all the students. And so um, when I was seeing what was happening in my community in terms of families being torn apart from each other, immigrant families being torn apart from each other, and really just a city in distress, people scared to go to work. I even know, like at my job, there's legal citizens that have been literally stopped and searched aggressively, and other folks who I work with are fearful to come to work because of the way that they look. And so that really opened my eyes and caused me to want to be able to be a part of a movement that is dedicated on caring for my neighbors. And I think I've been committed. I continue to be committed. And I will continue to stand up for what's right, and capture people's stories in the best way possible, while also telling my story.
Mhm. Now, a lot of journalists talk a lot about the First Amendment and how some people may think that it's being tried. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm curious around the idea of First Amendment when a bunch of MAGA lovers riot the United States Capitol, and many of which have never been tried, convicted, and have been pardoned by this current administration. So I struggle with the way that we have, on a national political platform, described the First Amendment in these past 4 years and during the previous Trump administration. Uh, and I think there's definitely um, a need to hone in on what the Constitution actually says and what it actually means. And I think we've strayed away from that. And it's been a direct threat to many different people who are trying to exercise their First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech, and goes further on to talk about the freedom of press. I think it is very dangerous, and we've seen historically the danger of when those two things are infringed upon in other nations. And I think as an American nation, we ought to align more with our democratic values and our Constitution.
Yep, thank you. In switching back to kind of the incident, and feel free to answer this how you'd like, but what was going through your mind when you turned yourself in?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask what was going on in my mind when the demonstration was happening. So I want to touch on that really briefly
Sure,
and
please.
then talk about the arrest. Um, it was, I talked to other people about this. I used the word juxtaposition
Mhm.
because it was two things simultaneously happening at one time. There were concerned community members demanding justice for Renee Good, who was killed and murdered by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. There was concerned community members raising their voices around wanting ICE to leave, specifically considering that one of the pastors at City's Church, David Easterwood, is the St. Paul, which is the city in which we were in, ICE field operator. And so his primary role is to manage and is to functionally work within ICE's capacity. And what you saw was a group of predominantly white individuals uh, who claim to be Christian, sort of ignoring the statement that was made in the church, in which the question was raised, how could someone be a pastor but also an ICE agent? And in that ignorance, folks were choosing to continue worshiping, which they have the choice to do, which they should do in this case. But it was an interesting act of worship. And I'm a Christian and I understand worship to be like surrendering to God and submitting to God's values. And to me, in that moment, that act of worship that I was seeing as people were protesting didn't feel like a righteous thing to do in that moment, especially when the question was raised. And so at that moment, like I really felt overwhelmed, really, by just the seeing literally what our nation is going through in one room. Like you can imagine, like you have like this idea of Christianity, this idea of humanity all happening amongst people who likely have very contrasting political views. And so that carried on with me as I turned myself in, essentially. Um, Understanding that it was something that I wasn't necessarily excited to do nor wanted to do. But I understood that like I value our our justice system, and I'm was going to do the due process, you know. And so I think that separates a lot of people from each other in today's society, is that there's this misinterpretation of what justice means and how we ought to be citizens in this country. And so um I felt completely like I was not an American citizen, that I wasn't valued in this country for all the work that I've done to make this country a better place with people in my community. I was chained by my hands, chained around my belly, and chained by my ankles for several hours without uh, much of anything. I was advised not to drink the water by the correctional officers from the faucet. I was not offered any food, a phone call, nothing. Granted, I turned myself in. You can just imagine a person who's never been arrested or has considerably respected the justice system be placed in a position when I simply was working and exercising my rights in terms of the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. And so that was very traumatizing. Um, Essentially, I was able to uh, get out of custody, but the fight is yet from over. And unfortunately, I have to be up against the federal government for the next unforeseeable future. My next court date is on February 13th. Today it is currently February, I want to say 9th, I believe. And I'm counting down the days until I can really uh, be released from this fear of the federal government, but also just this blatant attack on Black people specifically, as you can see in the indictment, but also, journalists and organizers.
Said something about doxing. What is your fear in that? Can you explain that to some who may not know the term also?
Yeah, so doxing is um a very weak thing to do. It's when people sort of target you via social media and via your private um privacy, like emailing, showing up to your house and whatnot. I can say that I've been overwhelmed by the amount of support from people. I received a message today from this lady who was clearly racist, but she messaged me and said, um, I hope everything goes well for you. Something along the lines of, you seem like such a great man. I hate that you're in this situation. I hope you don't follow those people no more and make better decisions for yourself. And to me, it was interesting because there was a through line of, I see like the good in you, but I don't align with your values. And that goes to talk about what I was mentioning earlier, this deep contrast that is almost seemingly unbelievable to me. Um, and I say that to say, like, I'm quite different. I'm in a different position than I think other people. The government was able to pick them up off the ground, and I stand in compassion my with the other people who are part of the indictment. They came to their houses at 6 a.m. in the morning. They followed them and forced them to surrender in a way. And I'm just grateful that I was able to kind of be diligent in how I was um, taking precautions after initial arrest was made, and finding a way to really have the best experience, although it still was something that I had never experienced before. And so I personally have received a different type of response from people, which is interesting to me. I think also the doxing happens when people are publicly humiliated by people in position. And that's what you've seen with every other arrest. They were uh, taken photos of and put on social media. There was altered AI images of people from the White House official page. There was a number of just intentional sort of display of people being unexpectedly picked up by federal ICE agents from wherever they were. And so um, I yeah, I guess that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So now you're a senior here at Temple University, and the situation has fallen in your lap. What is your hope for the future? You're ready to graduate, right?
I'm definitely ready to graduate. I definitely am not going to allow these sorts of distractions to kind of defer me from something that I've set my mind to, being a first generation college student at Temple University, entering in on a full ride, graduating in all 4 years is something that I really take pride in, especially just knowing how I grew up and all the obstacles that really had every reason for me not to be able to make it this far. And so I'm grateful to God that I'm able to have support around me and be focused. Obviously, it feels lonely because I can't have a conversation with somebody all the time about the details of the case, or I can't have a conversation with somebody and be like, yeah, remember when you also got a federal indictment? Like it doesn't feel, it's very lonely. And there are moments when I am uncertain about the future, uncertain about even me in school and graduating and focusing. But I remain hopeful and faithful that I'll continue to use the same resilience that I had when I was in St. Paul spreading truth.
Good. All right, let me just make sure. You kind of answered how your family and friends are responding and the overwhelming support you've received. Is there anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah, I don't know if there's ever really enough support, especially when you're dealing with like very powerful and dangerous individuals. And so I just encourage everyone to support your neighbors, continue to support me, in however you see fit, and support yourself most certainly, because I think part of why I'm able to be strong today is because I've really been a support of myself and believed in myself. And so moments like this uh, don't necessarily break me. They make me nervous for sure. They make me uncertain, but I think that is the fuel to continuing to be a person who is dedicated to wanting the world to be a better place.
Any message to other Temple students who might want to um, support or have similar uh, involvement in things like this moving forward?
Yeah, I guess I'd love to give a shout out to journalists and folks at Temple who are unapologetic in who they are and who they desire to be. I encourage you to continue to exercise your First Amendment. The interesting thing about this current administration is not here for long. And with that in mind, we've seen time and time in history when there have been an attack on literally everything from labor to gender to religion to humanity. And this is just another example of that. And so it's up to you to decide, how are you going to leave your legacy behind? And certainly, I am grateful for even those who have reached out at Temple, have reposted at Temple, and obviously those who are capturing the story and my story and the truth, for even putting their bodies on the line to talk about this. So thank you.